Hey guys, welcome back to Leagues. This is our not our last lecture, but lecture before last. So I say my lecture for last because I love making an entrance. I'm going to give you guys today a lecture about social media, and that is a very broad topic. So I could give like 17 lectures and like at least like stand on my soapbox for 10 hours talking about social media use in a professional setting. But I was just hoping to give you a primer on how to effectively use the Twitter accounts. I think Pri had a Twitter account, then Robert and Gabriel, I know you created one at the beginning of the program. And besides placing me, like how can you utilize a social media presence in a professional setting, since medical Twitter and surgical Twitter are a thing. So I'm going to start recording my introduction for anybody who hasn't seen like the other Leaks lectures. I'm Val. I'm one of the PGY4's general surgery residents here in Michigan and the program lead for Leaks and a self-appointed social media police. And not an expert, but I have been in Twitter for a long time, so that's why I'm giving this lecture. Let's see if I can start sharing my screen. Okay, and you guys can see that. Don't be scared. I know I have a million slides, but they're all short. Alrighty. Are you guys seeing the presenter mode? Okay. I'm doing like the old person thing. Are you guys seeing the regular screen now? Nope. Let me try this again. There's a way to get out of presenter mode. Since I have 17,000 screens. Are you guys still seeing the presenter mode? I feel like I judge all of my lecturers for being like, I can't work out the presenter mode. And now I am judging myself. Maybe if I shut off my additional screen. Give me 1 second, guys. I'm just gonna disconnect my additional screen. That'll probably do it. Ha! Everybody who's watching me on social media right now are gonna be like, does she actually know how Twitter works? Surprisingly, I do. Ha! I am a great success. Can you guys see me? Okie doke. Yes. Awesome, thank you. So this is our social media primer for the uninitiated. So the three of you, and sort of me, I'm like still kind of figuring out how to work out this whole social media thing. This is how I'm hoping to teach you how to create an effective and useful virtual presence through your medical school and then your residency. I am going to, there we go, that's Gracia. I'm like both the host and the presenter, which is fun. And there we go. And this talk should probably be called like how to do things in social media that are helpful. and sometimes not necessarily helpful. So how to score a job, gain an enemy, join a movement, and all sorts of social media misadventures and adventures that I have lived through my brief period in the Twitterverse. So some basics. I am an expert in many things, wound bags and like fascial closures, maybe not fascial closures, but closing skin being some of them. However, social media is not an area of my particular expertise. I just have spent a lot of time in it. There's a lot of social media talks out there that you can Google, and there's like finance ones and many healthcare ones, and like student specific some talks that you can listen to. So this is just one of the many. And you are going to hear a lot of my very personal opinions about social media and Twitter that I recommend that you take with a grain of salt. Sadly, I do not have any disclosures, but if anybody out in the universe wants to give me some disclosures and some money for anything or any sort of consulting, I'm open for business. So this is my usual like 3 a.m. situation in my house, and the reason why I'm likely giving this talk and is that I spend a lot of time in social media. That is my partner on the left side who shares a bed with me and is constantly wondering why I'm still on Twitter at 3 in the morning. And me, that's a picture of me at the hospital, but like that's usually how I look also at 3 in the morning in bed, wondering whether or not I should stop scrolling and liking things. I am on the higher end of the social media usage, but that presence in social media has allowed me to see a lot of like really awesome things in social media and not so awesome things. So that's why I'm giving you this talk today. So the goals for the lecture today are to introduce you to the professional value of social media. You are aware of social media through like your life. I mean, you were a teenager here in the United States. You probably had some sort of account. I'm like too old right now. So like I did have a MySpace at some point. But you will find, I'm hoping that you can find some professional value as you are rising physicians. And some of the people listening to this may be physicians as well. I want to teach you how to create and manage your social media accounts. The majority, all of you already have a social media account, but I think it's helpful to just go back to the basics, especially if you're trying to teach one of your mentees how they can create a social media account and do it effectively. And then I want to give you some pointers on how to maximize this social media presence and avoid some of the many pitfalls that will come on being an active online person. So we'll start by answering some of the burning questions about social media that everybody usually has, even people who are active on social media. One of them is, why is everybody so obsessed about it? And especially in like surgery and like med Twitter is a huge thing. Like, why is everybody on social media? Like, do I need to actually do this? And the answer to many of these questions is like, well, you don't need to, you don't have to. It's not part of your medical school curriculum to be a social media active or savvy. But the reason why it has had a huge boom over the past 5 or 10 years, and then more recently with COVID, is because sharing information among circles of people is difficult. And with the huge separations in time and space and training for people in medicine, I think that social media has become this like very, not just for us, for other professional groups and just people in general, this like outlet for like sharing ideas and thoughts that has its advantages and disadvantages. And some of these advantages are real, like the fact that you can access information at your fingertips, something that like, physicians 50 years ago didn't have, physicians 30 years ago, 20 years ago didn't have. And there's a lot of drawbacks to it too. But I will say that there is a fair degree of heavy usage of social media amongst physicians of specifically within like our age group and then the age group above us. Am I the last person to join Twitter? Likely, possibly, likely not. You probably still have classmates that don't have Twitters. Every time that I'm giving a lecture about social media to students, there's always like, oh my God, I'm like the last person getting onto this. And with the transition to like virtual interviews because of the COVID pandemic, there has been a rush of medical students joining Twitter. And I can feel the angst on like their initial posts of like whether or not they like have completely missed out. Like they're in like the ice age of social media and they're just trying to like come in and get some information about programs. Is it time to make a TikTok account since you already have a Twitter account? Likely not yet. I have many people on Twitter that I follow, which are like very talented TikTok people. I actually don't have a TikTok account and I don't know how TikTok works. I just know that there's like videos involved and there's a lot of dancing. And I dance very well, trust me. But like, I just don't know if I'm like made out of that substance that it will take for me to be able to have a TikTok account. So definitely something that we will just like touch upon. I wanted to mention it because there is actually like a reasonable amount of healthcare providers on TikTok, both positive and negative. That's gonna be like the theme of the whole talk, how social media can be good and bad. But for the purposes of this, and especially for students that are listening to this and be like, oh, like should I, as I'm trying to create a social media presence for the application season, should I like be making a TikTok account? Possibly not. Social media can be annoying. Like some people like it and some people don't. Overall, even like outside of your professional realm, I believe that you can have like having the choice of like having a presence online or not as just a regular human in the world. It's like very reasonable. I have friends that don't have any social media. Social media is time consuming and can often distance you from like in-person contact, which 100% should take precedence over anything. But right now it's like limited. So it has taken kind of this new forefront as a way of sharing information and sharing opinions. So it can be annoying. And like, I find it annoying sometimes. My partner definitely finds it annoying. A lot of people, faculty co-residents that are not as Twitter and social media inclined finding annoying, but it is not going anywhere anytime soon. And I'm hoping that by the end of the presentation, I can kind of sell you on the plus points and teach you how to minimize the negative points so that you can make a reasonable decision on whether or not you want to be active online. The number one pitch that I have for anybody, student, resident, faculty, about like why you should have some sort of like active, semi-active, upkept social media presence is because taking control of your virtual presence is super important. Like the first thing that I do, and this might just be me, so it might just be that I am a stalker, but like when I'm meeting a new person, either in a professional setting or if I'm like reviewing applications, and I review applications too, like I do on occasion will like look people up. And for someone who is a physician or a medical student or like lives in this like realm of service, we should know medicine is, I think it's important to like figure out what's out there. Like Google yourself once in a while, figure out what's coming up there. I remember switching my Instagram to private after realizing that like when you Google my name, the first thing that will pop out will be like 17 pictures of my dog, which is like not bad, but I do produce a lot of content, dog related content, and I didn't necessarily want that to be what popped out when somebody first Googled me or tried to look me up. I wanted to like Val, the like polished resident, to be the thing that popped out, and like even seeing since I don't have like millions of dollars to figure out how Google and like Google algorithm works, I figured that just removing the content or protecting the content online that I didn't want it to be at the forefront, and then like trying to create this not create this persona, but like rather present myself in an appropriate way in the same way that you will present yourself for an interview will be valuable. And some people are like, well, if there is nothing, if I'm not posting anything, then it's totally fine. And I will argue, and I always do, that like no content is actually super sketch. So if like I've Googled you and you're like a physician somewhere and like nothing pops up, I don't know if that's just me and my spidey senses, but I am often like, like what's going on? So having some control, and like it doesn't have to be much, but the first thing that pops out when like you Google some of my faculty will be like their professional page and then their like Twitter page that they like keep a very professional tone around. And if the first thing that pops out when you are an applicant for residency is like you're very reasonable, like opinion based, personal, but yet not too like edgy social media account, I feel like that is like an add-on to how you're presenting yourself to the world. I get this a lot, and if you look at like the amount of time that I've spent on my phone or today, it's probably like a couple of hours. I have so much to do. This is just like another thing that I have to do. I have to like study for my exams, and then like, how am I supposed to be going in and retweeting and doing all this stuff? And I hate it, and it's too much time. And that is true. However, there is such thing as like a nice balance in between like being able to maintain your social media presence and also be able to do the 17,000 things that you have to do as a student. And there is a lot of pluses to becoming a savvy virtual social navigator of sorts. And I'm hoping to walk you through some of those right now. And you probably have experienced some of those this month. So this is a little bit of an origin story of like how I got into social media. So like everybody, I'm gonna go ahead and let this person in. Most people like were introduced to social media through adolescence. So like I had a MySpace when I moved to the United States in 2008. That's a long time ago. And I like didn't really have any additional social media presence besides like Facebook when I transitioned out of like the forbidden place that is MySpace now. Um, and Facebook is Facebook, and I will talk a little bit more about like types of social media. But I didn't necessarily have a professional platform when I started medical school. I didn't have one in undergrad. It wasn't kind of like a thing. And this is Andrew Gonzalez. He is one of my mentors, longtime mentor. He was a resident when I was a student at the University of Illinois in Chicago. And when he started mentoring me back when I was like a little baby med student, like you all are, like I was literally at your level when I met Andrew, he was like, you should really get a Twitter account. And I was like, what? Like that? I mean, how's that going to help? And is that like even a thing? So he just kind of dropped that recommendation the way how he dropped a lot of recommendations through the years. And so I created one. And it was an interesting process because it got me asking myself, like, why did he wanted me to create a social media account? He mentioned that like surgeons were on Twitter, and I was like trying to like become a surgeon, but like that didn't make too much sense. And I didn't know how to work it. They were all just this like random 140 character comments. I didn't see a great value on it. So I just asked myself before I created, I'm like, what do I actually want from this besides like what Andrew told me to do? And it got me thinking about how I was hoping to network through Twitter, which is what a lot of people, especially students that are joining Twitter right now in the setting of the pandemic are. Like I need to figure out like this will be a route of access for me to get to know more about programs that I otherwise will have been regularly like interviewing at and getting to feel the people and the culture. And I actually was like trying to navigate like how in the expanding social media and just like internet availability of information picture, like how was I going to get my news? And that's surprising. You're like, oh my God, Val, you're getting your news from Twitter. That's horrible. The truth is that like the majority of like respectable news outlets have a Twitter feed that gets uploaded pretty frequently. So like don't kick until you try it. This is kind of what I came up with. And I was okay, networking, news, whatever. And so I created a Twitter account and I created it. And let me tell you, I just like left it there. Like I didn't tweet anything. If you look, there's like this big, like no, from 2014 to 2016 when I applied to residency, there's like nothing. And then I was like, oh my God, like I need to figure out how to get back on Twitter. Since during that hiatus, it had like become reasonably popular among surgeons. So this is a screenshot of my Twitter account today, and that's my handle on the corner if you didn't realize. A little backtrack. So that's my origin story with Twitter. You probably have been exposed to a myriad of varieties of like healthcare-ish social media types of expression. And we're going to go through some of them. Again, this talk is focused on Twitter because that's my main professional social media platform. But I know that other things exist and you probably have come by it at some point during applications in the past year and some change. And so we're going to talk about them briefly and then we'll concentrate on Twitter. So Facebook, the end all of all social media and also stealing of information. Instagram, this is supposed to be Instagram. Okay, I hope you guys can see my pointer. If you can, let me know. LinkedIn, which was the other social media platform that you probably have gotten at least 15 notifications that someone wants to be your contact in LinkedIn, then Twitter. So we're going to talk about them briefly in terms of the pluses and minuses from like a professional lens, not personal. I know that like your grandmother and all your aunts are on Facebook and that's what you can't get off of it. So Facebook and doctors. Besides talking to your grandmother on Facebook, on like being in touch with all those high school friends that like you don't necessarily remember, Facebook and especially Facebook private groups have been very popular among physicians for a long time, both for like recruitment purposes, but also for like this like community building. I have never been part of one. This is an article that I found, and often actually my partner has like he's Facebook active and like has trolled into some of these like doctor Facebook groups that are all like in both opposite ends of the spectrum in terms of opinions, political opinions, all that. But this is like a positive way in which like physicians and healthcare providers congregate on Facebook, which is usually in like a supporting, connecting type of way. However, there is also such thing as multi-billion-dollar frauds coming out of like private physician Facebook groups. So, and there's a lot of a lot of negatives to Facebook that I won't get onto today. But the bottom line for me is that I actually don't use it for personal reasons, and I definitely don't use it as a professional platform. And my opinion is that like Facebook contact with patients, it's like kind of a no-no. Instagram is my personal social media platform, and I chose it to be so because I love pictures. This is an example, however, it is used for as a professional platform by many physicians actually, with varying degrees of success and kind of flavors to it. So this is Dr. Michael Galvez. He's a plastic surgeon in California. He trained at Stanford. He's actually one of my favorite Instagram like medical people. And I do follow a couple. I don't follow too many. I try to keep it just like friends, family, and like all of like the cute arts and crafts and cat pictures that I can fit on my timeline. Michael actually started his Instagram account like I like saw him like creating it and then like building a following over a couple of years. And it has been fascinating. His main focus is around like mentoring, like mentorship of like pre-medical and medical students on like their pathway to medicine. So that's why I follow it. It's like, it's kind of my jazz. And he has done it very well. He like produces a lot of like educational content and opinion pieces. I'm a fault of aligning to with a lot of like his opinions about things, and like in the realm of trying to like get like differing opinions to my own. I'm not super good about it. That's a disclosure, but this is one way on how medical or professional interface of like medical folk and then Instagram can happen. And this wouldn't be a social media talk if I wouldn't be talking about medical and healthcare influencers. This is from an article that I found. I don't necessarily follow any of those people. I have never looked this good on Scrubs a single day in my entire life. But apparently some people do. And so this phenomena of like the medical influencer, beyond just the like informational, like mentoring service wise, it's huge. Like I'm sure you guys have found it in your social media platforms. And I don't necessarily have a feeling about it. I have a lot of friends who like have similar influencing accounts, and you know what, you do you. And I think it's really reasonable. There's sometimes monetary gain and some kind of like gray areas around like influencing on Instagram. But I do feel like the visuals of it are a little complicated. And I think this article, and if you need the links, I can provide them too. It's quite telling in terms of the general term of like you seeing your doctor, like doing certain activities. There might not be as necessarily savory, but like in the general outlook of things is not something I'll necessarily do. But if you are good enough and savvy enough to become an influencer, please let me know how you're getting those free scrubs. LinkedIn is probably the platform that I'm least familiar with. This is a picture. This is Dr. Dimick's LinkedIn. I use Dr. Dimick as an example on social media very often because he's very active on it. But this is a very young Dr. Dimick. His current picture, his hair is a little whiter. And LinkedIn is the best way to describe LinkedIn. I don't know if you guys have a LinkedIn, but it is like a social media, a social platform for like recruitment, brand production, heavily used in finances actually. And it's almost like your CV and your contacts all in like a single kind of like page interface. And so it is used in healthcare a lot. I think that Doximity is taking over a little bit in terms of like LinkedIn for physicians, sort of, kind of, without some of like this active discussion aspects, but it's heavily used in like finances and business. And a lot of physicians that you might know will have like LinkedIn pages, and it's often the first thing that actually patients find when they Google you. I don't think I have a LinkedIn page, but it is something that you can definitely create, and it's very low maintenance, and you probably will get a lot of emails about it from your colleagues. Which brings us to Twitter. So the Twitterverse, which is where I live, is pretty awesome. This is our awesome league's Twitter that we created and curated, and we have 226 followers. But the way how at least we have used Twitter for leagues is just for like sharing of our material and our content. So like if I was like, instead of like having, when we do have a website, but like this is a lot more interactive. So this is one of my favorite ways of actually using Twitter, was like if there is like a research enterprise, a research group, our surgery program, training program, creating like a social media presence for medicine in Twitter is actually very easy and because it allows you to interact with a lot of people, which is really great. However, you can also do Twitter wrong, and I don't have too many comments about doing Twitter wrong. So I'm just gonna like leave that out there and just like put it there, not say anything. But there is ways of having a Twitter presence that is not as productive. So does this mean, after this great overview of all the social media accounts, that you need to use all of the social media accounts? Because that's a lot of like going through passwords and creating passwords. And the answer is no, you don't need to use all the social media accounts. You do need to use one of them. Oops, sorry, go back on that. There we go. And Twitter is one of the most commonly used for physician platforms, even though, like I mentioned, it is like there's many that are used. And so this is why I often would just kind of default to Twitter when a student is asking me, oh, like, should I open a social media account or should I not? So let's go to the next one. Ooh. I feel like an old person trying to go through a PowerPoint presentation. Okay, so social media has been used enough to capture the attention of academia, who in traditional academia fashion has produced papers about it, which is awesome. So there's a lot out there about like social media use for healthcare providers and physicians, this like risk-benefit analysis, best practices, which is very good. And there's a lot of guideline, like society guidelines in terms of like best practices for Twitter use. So like I said at the beginning, this is just my best practices that I have like kind of like Mod Podge compile from like being a resident, a physician, person of color, all of that. There is a lot of opinions around social media and healthcare, heavy opinions, and people are like, no, you should never use it. And I think that they are very well granted, because there is a risk with using social media and being like visible when you're in the interface of patient care and being like a virtual person. And so I do welcome a lot of the criticism around social media, just because I think that it is often granted. But it is a thing, and it's a thing that like a lot of people want to use, both for like personal like brand creation, but also just to like figure out like if you want the information, healthcare information, to be out there, to be true, and like what information do you want to be able to put out there as a physician or a healthcare provider, and how do you want to do that, and how do you take control of the message. So there's also a lot of guidelines out there just from consulting accounts and things like that on how physicians can best manage their social media accounts. So the question for someone who maybe just became new to social media or to Twitter, and again, the rest of the application of the presentation is very Twitter heavy, is how do you get started? And so this is, apologies if this is very, very basic, since some of you already have Twitter accounts. But I think that the first step is to actually create a Twitter account. And create a Twitter account is very easy. You will go into the website and just provide your email. I do have a recommendation that you use your non-professional account, like your non-admin account, to create your Twitter, because you will get some email notifications and stuff that you probably don't want to associate it with an account that is eventually gonna go. I'm just gonna pause for 1 second. I got a message that there was a recording. Okay, we are good. There was like a little lapse in the recordings, and we will start again. My goodness, why am I having so many issues presenting today? Okay, we are good again. So choosing a sensible username, something that people can find you. At sexy boy like 135 won't work for this. and a reasonable headshot is often helpful. Don't be an egg. I know a lot of people have been eggs for a long time. So if this is going to be your professional account, it does merit a professional headshot. And if you have a professional headshot, you can put it there. Okay, so I'm no longer an egg. You have like chosen your professional headshot, and now everything looks nice and pretty. And then you're trying to figure out what is a good starting point for in terms of like getting like following people and doing things online. And a good starting point is often to follow the people that that you value in your field are following. So I didn't tell the league's leadership team, but I'm putting them all on blast, and I'm using like all of their like social media accounts as examples because they're doing very good. But for example, this is a screenshot of Jessica's follow, like the people that she follows, and this is something that I did like back when I opened my first social media account, and that was just kind of like going around and trolling through actually Andrew Gonzalez, who was a resident at that point. He's a vascular attending now, the people that he was following, and then like finding all of the surgeons and like public health people that he was following that I was interested in following. The other thing that you can do is that you can search for your real life contacts and see if they have active handles. If you're just starting your social media account and you don't know who's in it or who's not on it, it's often helpful to like, if you already have an extramural in real life community, to kind of like join that community with your virtual community. So you see what they're talking about, and it's always helpful when you're trying to figure out what you're going to tweet and not. This is Dr. Romero's account. Minerva was a resident when I was a student, and she's now an attending endocrine surgeon. And she was actually the first Latina surgeon that I ever came across. And I came across her on Twitter and social media. And we'll talk a little bit more about like visibility of like minority providers and like their importance in terms of them being visible in social media. But that's like just one story about how initially like her having chosen to be active in social media was meaningful for me as a student, to see someone like me doing something that I was hoping to do. Following news and celebrity accounts can change the flavor of your timeline, which is going to be the kind of like the thing you scroll through, similar to Instagram and Facebook. Sometimes for better. I am a big fan of Barack Obama and everybody associated with him, especially our FLOTUS, Michelle Obama. However, it can also be for worse. So if you like follow a lot of like celebrity accounts and stuff, the type of content that you're gonna get in your timeline, and if you only have like, let's say a few minutes to scroll through it to the morning, do you want it to be like the articles that people are like talking about, or do you want it to be like about like no one article in the middle of like a bunch of noise from things that that are more like entertaining based? So I have been trying very hard to like keep the people or like the accounts that I follow within the realm of content that I want delivered, because that's finally what you're doing when you're following accounts, is curating the content that you're getting in your timeline per the great Twitterverse algorithm. So it wouldn't be a surgeon doing a social media talk if I didn't give you a little anatomy lesson on what I personally think a good social media account looks like. So this is Gracia's Twitter page, which is very sensible for a student. She has a beautiful headshot of herself. There is always a space up here to put something. And I'm always at loss at like, what is this like big background picture? It makes me think of like back in MySpace where you could do themes on your mic. I know I keep talking about MySpace. I'm sorry, I'm old. But there is a room for another picture up there at the top. And then she has a sensible username that can be followed. And I think that this is a part that often people ask about, is like, what should you put on like the little tiny mini bio? And I feel strongly that like if it's going to be your professional account, you should link your professional sites. And it is an opportunity also, especially when you're a trainee, for you to like link the site that you're training at. So a lot of medical schools and residency programs of all specialties have active social media accounts nowadays. And so being able to link them up, for me, it's like I live and breathe recruitment, both at the level of medical students, but also for my training program. And so having a link for that in there, as I describe like who I am and why I'm here for, it's important for me. So I have that. She also has her other important organizational involvement. So, for example, like even though I'm like I can't remember the last time that I have it has been a minute since I've been a student, a medical student. Like I have LMSA national in my brief bio, and I do because I feel strongly about people being like, oh, if you had never heard about LMSA and you just like randomly stumble in my profile and then you clicked on it and got to hear about this amazing organization, then that's an opportunity of linking someone who otherwise haven't been exposed to the content to it, which I think is very it's a very like a very savvy way of like doing a little bit of networking and promotion. um, and she's got like her overall single goal that I'm wholeheartedly supporting off is that she's an aspired general surgeon. And we're going to talk about hashtags a little bit later, but hashtags are often included on biographies if there is something that you feel strongly to link. Hashtags are used to like link similar like disparate conversations to like a single content base, and so sometimes people will put them in their bio if they feel strongly about someone being able to link them to a given conversation. So that is her little anatomy dissection, and the last thing I want you to get through it is that like and you'll hear this 3 times. I hate so much. I know hate is a bad word, but I will continue to say it. Poor graphics on like professional social media accounts because I think it looks sloppy. Like you wouldn't send a pixelated account or like picture and like you wouldn't attach a pixelated picture to your CV. Having like all like pictures that are like, poor quality or pixelated as part of like your social media or post that you make and then you click and it's like all grainy, that is just a personal pet peeve. There's nothing wrong with it. If that's the only picture you have, that's fine. But you will hear me talking about it at nauseam because I have noticed as societies and like residency programs and organizations that don't necessarily have like a social media person have trying to like take Twitter and like hop on the Twitterverse, you will see a lot of like this very interesting posts which are like obviously not constructed properly or not constructed like in a savvy way, and that's what I'm hoping to teach you how to do now. So like hear me out, like put that filter on, like nobody's gonna care. I want to see a beautiful picture of you, and we will talk about more about like creating like tweets with graphics, which is helpful, both to sharing your work, but also if you're like tweeting something and there is like a graphic that is appropriate, that's always helpful. See, so you have drawn your cards, you create your Twitter account, and like finally gave in to all of me telling you, please create a Twitter. It's important. You want to use it. So now that you have drawn your cards, must you play the Twitter game? Fortunately, you do not have to play the Twitter game if you don't want to, if you create an account, because you don't need to post anything or create content to enjoy some of the just frank information lurking benefits from Twitter. So there is such thing as just witnessing a conversation without being part of and consuming information without it. There's always like the long time follower, first time caller. You can be that person. You don't have to be posting things. You can retweet if you want. But if you find yourself overwhelmed of like, oh my God, do I need to tweet like, is the tweet okay? You don't have to. You can just like lurk and simmer in the sauce of social media and not be an active participant, and that is totally okay, and you still have like a page that is like searchable. However, there are many pluses to joining conversations about topics that you feel passionate about, and this is something that I always talk to students about because I think that it is a challenging thing to become a visible social media person when you are a student and you are trying to and you're trying really hard to remain professional and like not having any issues or anything like that. And so if this is a concern of you, and it can be a concern, it should be a concern, you shouldn't feel forced to like joining any sort of conversation. However, there is a value to joining a conversation, and so if you want to do it, I always encourage people to do it, and you might find great value on it. So Twitter used to be 140 characters. Now it's 280, thank God. But there was like this huge thing when it was like right around the time that I joined Twitter. I'm like, oh my God, like it used to be 140, and there's like this art form to the short tweet. And like, let me tell you, I always go over on tweets. But like when you're trying to figure out like how do you tweet, and like what am I going to put out there? Let's say that you like see an article or like have an opinion and you want to create some content for Twitter, or like, you know, share some content with your followers or the people that you're following. I think it's always daunting to be like, okay, how am I going to put like this soapbox talks on like 280 characters? So little Twitter 101, also known as common sense. And I don't want to be condescending, but I feel very strongly about like reinforcing these lessons, mostly because I personally have gotten burned by these lessons, as everybody has, that is like an active person in social media. So it shouldn't be, this is not like Priscilla, Robert, Gabriel, or Jessica issue. This is like an everybody issue. And keep profanity of the Twitterverse. Like a lot of people like do the asterisk and thing, and like that's fine. I mean, like you guys know that I curse as a sailor. Twitterverse, surprise. Like this general surgery resident curses all the time, and I try to keep it to a minimum, and I definitely keep it away from like my clinical care areas, but I curse. But you don't need to curse on Twitter because it's your professional account. In the same way how you wouldn't curse when you're like texting your attending about a patient that you're caring for. My head on that. Talking to your professor or presenting something that you're like in, like, you know, it's a professional like setting and you can keep it nice and clean. Again, very second nature, but do double check for spelling and typos. Like there is nothing worse than having a tweet go viral and you realizing that you like spell something wrong, and then you're like, okay, so what am I gonna do? I'm just gonna remove it and start all over. So, and you will do it though. It won't matter. But it's always like spell check will always get you. And the Twitter, the little tweet box doesn't do as much spell checking or like grammar checking as you think it is. So it's always helpful to just like read it to yourself before you send it out. And I used to call this a Val rule, and it's not really a Val rule. It was probably a rule of one of my chiefs. And this is a translation of a clinical rule that you will hear a lot when you become interns. And when we're teaching our interns, like, okay, like you're going to be by yourself taking some call, and you're going to be making some decisions, and some of them are going to be big and some of them are going to be small, and you're getting your training wheels to learn how to take care of patients. And if you are wondering about something for like 30 seconds too long or thinking a little bit hard about it, you are allowed to call and ask for help and just ask questions, and it's totally fine. If you think about it too hard, just call and ask. And this is like my translation of their rule to Twitter. If you find yourself thinking a lot about a post and like, I know, it's like, oh, I don't know, well, I kind of want to say this, but like, is it gonna sound right? And like that doesn't necessarily apply when you think that like, oh, am I gonna get crucified, or not crucified, but like shunned for like expressing my political opinion. That's a totally different subject, and you should like post that tweet about Black Lives Matter. But if you're like wondering if like this is like like the question is like, is this a constructive online discussion, or is this something that I should be like, you know, handling offline? And so that's usually a very good rule when you're trying to figure out if you want to tweet something or not tweet something, or yes, tweet something. And I did this last week, and like I will have moments of weakness in which I will like want to like just rant and I will do like 15 tweet, like just take that note that I like typed when I was angry and put it in a tweet, and I was like, maybe I shouldn't do that, and then I deleted it. Some Twitter plus rules, not hidden rules, but just things that you don't know when you're starting. If you're trying to be savvy and be like, oh, at Dr. Demick, leaks was awesome. If you're mentioning someone's handle at the beginning of a tweet, like at the very beginning, if you're trying to be like, like Viva Wen, like this was great. Put a dot before the ad, because if you don't put a dot before the ad, then only the people who are following you and that person, like the overlap, will actually be able to see the tweet. So it won't be like a public conversation, and the tweet won't be as searchable. So if you put a dot behind it, it will be just as if you are posting in your account. If you want it to be a private conversation between the two of you, then you can definitely just avoid it. 208 characters is very short when someone is as strong as I am. And if you run out of room, you can just make a thread. And if you make a thread, I will provide you some tips on how to exactly do that. However, you can expand yourself beyond your 280 characters. And then this is a key fact for everybody, because we are all at this point associated with major universities, and is that it's always helpful to just like take a quick peek at your institution's social media rules. If there is not a policy, this should be a policy. But a lot of hospitals and institutions will have like social media privacy rules, and it's like I don't think it's like make it and break it. You're not gonna go. It's not gonna be super bad about it unless you're like sharing PHI or stuff. But it's always helpful because there is sometimes like weird things that like come up, like whether or not they like want you to say, you know, like our teats and not endorsement and stuff like that when you're in a position or holding a position in a university. And so it's always helpful to just like kind of check. Stay up of the side of the pool, children. It's not worth it. It's just a tweet. It's just social media. So what's happening with all these hashtags? I have no idea like where this became a thing. And before I actually looked it up, I was like, why is there so many hashtags? And people were like doing hashtags for like silly things. And the actual information behind hashtags, which now it like totally makes sense, is that they are made for organization. So they are made to take all this like post about a bunch of things that are being made by a bunch of people and around many conversations around the same topic and make them easier to find and search. So that if you are like, man, I have been hearing about this leaks program and I don't really want to find information about it, but maybe I don't have like Twitter handle, like let me just or about Michigan, hashtag Michigan Promise. And so you can find the information around a single conversation easier. The original purpose is categorization and discovery. However, they're very often used for marketing and branding. And so when you're asking yourself, should I be following a popular or commenting on like a popular Twitter hashtag? Of course, by all means. I will talk more about like my personal position on like a lot of Twitter hashtags, like in the way how they like done on Instagram and stuff, for people to be able to like flock to a post. But like for the purposes of like a professional Twitter account, I think that it is really reasonable to just like limit the hashtags. And then again, at this stage that you are on, like yes, you're creating this to like build on your like virtual persona and like use Twitter for like news and networking. Like, do you need to have 1,000 hashtags on your post? Probably not. If you are commenting or making a post about something that it is covered under a popular hashtag, definitely. Making new hashtags is like a wild rodeo. It's a wild rodeo. Like I have seen all sorts of crazy hashtags or like very interesting hashtags being made, and you can by all means, but like I might judge you. That's all. That's all I'm gonna say about hashtags. And hashtags are super helpful. So here is, I'm gonna lower myself. Some you guys learn about the visual abstract from the creator, Dr. Ibrahim. And so if you hashtag visual abstract, you will see how a lot of visual abstracts get hashtag visual abstract so that you can find them easier. And you can see some helpful information here about the management of visceral aneurysms. And then more recently, the hashtag Meg Bikini was born around the very powerful controversy of that paper that shall not be named vascular surgery paper. And so if you wanted to find information about that conversation, then you could definitely do that by going ahead and hashtag MedBikini on the search bar. So you have a Twitter account, you heard or listening to the internet to this talk by this random resident in Michigan, and you're like, okay, I'm like ready to tweet. I'm just gonna go ahead and do it. And I have the perfect thing to tweet about. Something super cool happened at school, cadaver lab, work. Can I tweet about it? Because I feel the world needs to hear about what I went through. And the answer to that is maybe not. So, and there's a difference. And so there's some granularity to it. So this is why we're talking about it. So there are very few things sadder than breaking projected health information rules. It is sad. It's sad mostly because the majority of the time it actually doesn't happen with like maleficence around it. It would just be like you were truly excited about something. You saw something really cool. You experienced something really cool or jarring, or just we're in a field of like strong emotions and experiences, and every single day we have the incredible privilege of participating in our patients' lives in a way that very few people get to. And so and you also spend all your time at work and at school. So it's understandable that sometimes you want to like air some of those emotions out in like your brand new spanking social media. However, there is a lot of things that are PHI. And so The only thing, and this is not like a PHI talk, you're all probably getting one in medical school, and in residency we'll also get one. There is no reason for me to like be that dead horse, but lots of things are protecting health information. Lots and lots of things. The story of the patient, like if you tweet something the day off and like there is a way of identifying the patient, even if you don't say their name, even if you don't say their age, even if you don't say their gender, it is very easy. It is murky waters. It is difficult. And so my only piece of advice is just to check yourself before you wreck yourself. And the reason is because you have a lot of trust that was placed on you by your patients and coworkers. And as a student, as a resident in a clinical setting, definitely. As a faculty, just the same. As a student, the trust goes on you as soon as that white coat came on. And so you just have to be very mindful of what you share. And I think that especially from like medical school, it is a time of like heavy feelings. And a lot of things are happening that you're going to want to share and not share and discuss. And there's definitely a room for that on social media. And I have seen some very like heartfelt and touching discussions in social media around this. But just think about it twice. And then if it feels, again, going back to that golden rule, if it feels a little icky and you're like, oh, I don't know if I should be sharing that, then the answer is probably no. And then you can probably just like, drop me a line and we can talk about it. This is a picture. So this is not a PHI violation for first. But I just wanted to explain to you the origin of this picture and like what it took to actually make it available. This is my favorite picture of all time, forever and ever, until the day that something happens again. I see a chat. Lately, I've been tweeting and deleting, trying tweeting and a quick pause. So we have a question from Priscilla. It says, or a comment. Lately, I have been tweeting and deleting, trying to figure out tweeting. And that is totally fine. Like, that's totally fine. And you will get the handle of it as you do more and more of it. But at the beginning, it's hard because you're like, did I just totally blow up my chances to become a general surgery like 3 years before I applied? The answer is usually no. However, you want to be like cognizant of it. And so this is why we're giving this lecture, to kind of show you that your opinions matter and you can share them, but you just have to be cognizant of how you share. So we took this this is I'm the one with the red hat and the red loops. So it's like my fantastic red hat with zebras on it, which I love. And I was the PGY2 in pediatric surgery. And like this like miracle of pipeline happened in which like in the operating room, we got to do this great operation for a patient. And like my intern, I was the second year, my fellow and my attending were all women of color. And I cannot tell you, but like I wrote a piece about it. You can find it somewhere. It's like all my bushy feelings about how especially felt for me to be in a space in which I was like, oh my God, like this means the world to me. And one of the scrubs like heard me talk about it and they were like, oh my God, we should take a picture. So she like stood over the drapes and took a shot. And afterwards, I was like, oh my God, my entire life is gonna end. We took a picture in the operating room and it's like a pediatric patient. And so the first thing that I did, because my attending was like, oh, this is a beautiful picture, we should make it available. And I was like, I don't know, is that as soon as we finished the operation, I went to my patient's family and I was like, hey, like this really awesome thing happened in the operating room. We snapped this picture. I like made a copy for them. And I was like, I just wanted to make a copy for you and let you know it was very special. And like, I appreciate it. I got to take care of this patient of your family member. We are hoping to use it, like to be able to share it, and kind of like went through like all the ins and outs of how it will be shared. And then I was like, you are totally okay to say no, but like if there's an opportunity you consider, there is like no identifiable information, could we use it? And so consent was given like immediately after the picture was taken. It's better if it's given before. And the form got filed with the right spot and like the hospital like catacombs or whatever, and then we were able to share it. But that was like the degree of level of like consent that has to happen for this type of pictures to be shared. And it is very important because there's a lot of intraoperative pictures that are shared. I have another thing on the chat. I had to step out. Oh, I see. No problem. You can step out. Bye, Priscilla. The level to which this type of like content can get you in trouble, like rightfully so, it's not insignificant. And so I'm usually in like the like less is more, like we should probably not be taking pictures and stuff like that. But if you want, you can do it the right way, and that usually involves asking for consent from even if you cannot see the patient. The rules on this are murky. So like if you don't have any identifiable information and it's like just you standing in a room where there might or might not be a patient, it's actually like not like hardcore. It's not a hardcore no, as in like no, it can be done. However, it always makes me feel better, and it makes me feel better from like a consent perspective, that like if a picture like this was obtained, that it will be under the appropriate patient consent. And things like this apply. I know this is like the on the total edge. It's like, oh, you were doing surgery and like there was a picture taken, but this also applies for things just like, you know, if you have a picture that you want to share from like an interesting case, or like even if you're in the hospital and just took a selfie and like maybe there was a patient in the back, like all of those things you have to think about, even if it's your coworker, that like it's just a coworker and like they just are picture in the background, like you probably want to get consent before you share any of these pictures on social media. Alrighty, so I totally broke things down. You can't share that cool picture in the operating room. You can't tweet anything. Blah, blah, blah. Val, you're super boring. So if I can't tweet pictures of me doing surgery, what can I tweet? So the real question is like my better question is like, what do you want to tweet about? And this is interesting because I think that there are different motivations to getting a social media account. There is a motivation of, oh, I want to like have an active social media account for like application purposes, or I want to have a social media account so I can follow other surgeons. And the truth is that you can tweet about whatever you want, and like all these things that I'm saying about like, oh, like, you know, be mindful of what you like, of the optics of it and things like that. Might not apply if like you just kind of want to drop an opinion about something and you feel passionate about it. There is a children's book called The Tweeting Gala, and I know I like totally need to get it for my future child. But you don't want to be a tweeting gala. So this is like the only warning that point about like tweeting and over tweeting. There is such thing as over tweeting, and this is kind of like my one like slide about it. Much like writing, sharing your thoughts in an organized way in Twitter is totally possible, and it can be done, and you can work on it. A lot of tweeting and deleting, and just like looking at what other people do, tweets that you have liked, like presentation of information in a way that has been appealing to you is important, and you can follow suit. But you don't have to be a tweeting gala. And I dislike tweeting galas because sometimes it's hard to follow someone's like train of consciousness on social media, even though that is something people do and it's totally okay. So what can you do with social media besides tweeting and like the value that I see on social media? I believe that Twitter has created a space for like community for people in medicine that are often disenfranchised within their own institutions. If you are the only Black resident, the only Black student, the only Latino student, the only Latino resident in a space, is so challenging, or the only person interested in global surgery, interested in education, finding people within your field, within healthcare that have like similar interests to you is challenging. And I can personally attest to like the refreshing nature of being able to see a platform, like Room providing a platform for things like Black men in medicine. This was another really interesting like kind of move, hashtag bound like series of posts of happy immigrant docs around the time in which like a lot of like the immigration like reform rules were happening. I think it was about a year ago or so. This happy immigrant docs thread came out in Twitter of a lot like just like the incredible immigrant workforce in the United States, both like directly immigrated like IMG route, but also like people like us that like my like joined medicine after having immigrated. Like I'm an immigrant. I mean, like I'm a U.S. citizen, but I'm an immigrant, and I feel like an immigrant in the settings that I work. So this was, you should definitely check it out. It's really awesome. All this like awesome immigrant doc, immigrant surgeons, all the specialties represented. And then more importantly, from like a advocacy and policy stance was the now infamous NRA comment to the Twitter docs about how we needed to stay in our lane when we were making posts about gun control and gun reform. And so this is our lane movement and the hashtag that came after that, and all of the awesome posts that came after and continue to come after it around gun violence and the role of physicians and healthcare providers in like preventing a gun injury and then like reducing gun violence by true gun reform have been really awesome. And for me, I'm the only Latino resident in my program, and having moved from a setting in which I was taking care of a lot of Latino patients to Michigan, where there is less access to that, no, I used to speak Spanish every day. I like, there's not many Latino surgeons. Like having a space in which I'm able to like network and meet other Latino surgeons, residents, students like yourselves, it is super important. And Twitter provides that platform. So this is the Latino Surgery Society, which was founded actually by a group of Latino doctors, including Minerva, who was one of the original, Dr. Romero, original founding members. And it like provides a place in which, like, if I have a Latino student which is like interested, I can be like, hey, they're active on Twitter. They're like publishing about events. They have like the information about their membership or the link to their membership in there. MedTwitter is like a whole ordeal that includes all specialties, and it can be summoned for good, like in the case of the infamous vascular surgery article. But it is truly a community of like physicians in Twitter that are vocal about all sorts of issues, and that is a community that's also self-accountable and self-regulated, which I think is important. That sometimes can go a little bit too much the other way. So like, calo culture and things like that is a discussion for probably a longer talk. But it is something that I can tell students about, and then they can like go and like search. And so like, when medical students are joining Twitter right now, I can be like, like here it is, 250 doctors you can follow, like an assortment of them depending on what you're interested in hearing about. And of course, my shameless plug for the Latino Medical Student Association, the original homes of all homes for me as a medical student coming into a setting where I felt like I just didn't have any, like my mom used to like says, I felt like una mosca en leche. Like I was just there in medical school trying to learn, and I like didn't know, I didn't have any friends, and just feeling very lost and within my mission as a medical student. And then finding the Latino Medical Student Association like if I was a student or a pre-med, I didn't even know about them when I was an undergrad. And now this information is like really accessible because of the virtual spaces, but also Twitter. SNMA and SBAS are other organizations that have like pretty active social media Twitter platforms that are always great. And so this concept of like being able to create community online is very attractive to me. And the reason why I like continue to being awake at 3 a.m, trying to like follow people and find people and connect with people online. So as I promised, these are my last couple of slides. Lots of personal opinions. So 5 things Val hates. Poor graphics and pixelated pictures. It is better if you don't post that picture. Just don't do it to me. I'm following you all. I will like be looking at your Twitters. Don't do it to me. Please do not post a pixelated picture. Find a good picture, post it. Poor graphics as well. So like the visual abstract, like Boom, is an interesting one because sometimes when you cannot find a good, like if you're sharing your work in your visual abstracts, and very soon you guys will be putting the visual abstracts for your projects, put the high quality like resolution file in. Faulty links to articles and videos. It's like, I'm like, look at a tweet and I'm like, okay, I'm gonna link on it. And then it's like, it sends me to like nowhere land. I dislike that. This is for the people out there who are like retweeting Black Lives Matter, but like still going out there without a mask. Performative allyship in social media is a thing, and it happens, and it is a phenomena of people becoming more aware of like their social responsibility around like injustice for patients, for providers, for themselves, for the world. And I find it very difficult when like people are like being very vocal about it on social media, not just Twitter, but like Instagram, all of that. And then not, like come out and vote. So I personally, it's a personal take of mine, not saying that you cannot be an ally online, but just like at the same time that you're pressing that tweet button, you should be pressing that donate button, or like signing someone up to vote, signing yourself up to vote, doing your research, staying engaged. So just something to keep in mind. Aggressive use of hashtags. I promised I was going to talk about hashtags. So again, keep it in mind. Why am I hashtagging something for? I'm hashtagging it so someone can find this conversation later. If you're creating some like random hashtag out of somewhere because you think it's like a thing, it's not a thing. Don't try to make it a thing. It's not a thing. Not fetch. Twitter lists. I hate Twitter lists. And I wish I had taken a screenshot of Dr. One of, I will send you guys the screenshot later, but one of like the very active social media physicians, she's an emergency medicine doctor, and she made a whole post about Twitter lists and how they're like used for trolls on social media to like target female physicians. And then I went and I looked at my lists, and it was like a horror show. So something to keep in mind. I dislike Twitter lists. Things that Val loves. Credit credit, 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 credit. If you see something cool and you want to retweet it or tweet it, an article, it is always helpful if you try to find if the author of the article, it can be like a what I call like secular article or in the religion of academia. If you can find their handle and give them credit, that's pretty awesome, because then it doesn't mean that they have to make like another tweet about it. So appropriate credit period, and appropriate credit with like Twitter language is helpful. I love tweets with accompanying graphics. So if like we heard all about the visual abstract. So like how much a visual abstract versus like having like the whole, or sorry, the just like a tweet of the title of the article versus the visual abstract made a difference. Humans are like visual animals. If you have an appropriate like graphic that makes sense, like add it in to your tweet and you will add dimension to it. There's also some accessibility features so when you add graphics, so you can like add descriptions and things that make it easier for people that are like visually impaired and stuff to understand what you're trying to portray with your graphic. I love when healthcare providers and students take a visual stance against injustice. A lot of, even though I like talk about performative allyship, a lot of the things out there are actually like true like commitment to social causes that people feel finally comfortable to speak about. Injustice in training settings, all of this is very powerful and important. I love seeing it. Also, people of color speaking their truth and finally sharing it in a social media setting that has people clutching to their pearls. I do that with some regularity. And I am a big Michelle Obama fan, and I love her tweets. So that's another thing that I love. Some leftover pearls. Self-promotion is totally fair. You know, like you're awesome, I'm awesome, you're awesome. Like if you want to put about something about the last article you wrote, the grant that you got, the dog that you got, whatever you feel, like that's totally fine. However, if that's everything that you're posting about and like you're just using it as a like platform for like promotion of your own work, it's kind of boring and like sort of obvious and like turns me off. You will never be wrong to lift out another person. So this is why I like love retweeting. It's like for their work, their opinions, their accolades, like pride, like it's like high yield and nutritious, and it will clear your skin. It will be great. And so like I think that like that there's not enough of that. And then navigating the social media waters with care this application season. This is more for like, you know, Jessica and Gracia that are there and anybody out there that will be listening to this and they're on M4. It's important because like social media right now is like outspoken and vibrant and all of this. And like, by all means, take part of that conversation, but also just like, you know, look at it. And I'm like, just make sure that this feels like something that you printing this whole Twitter feed and putting in your application is something you feel 100% about. And if you don't, then, you know, that's okay. Like, I think that there is definitely a room for you to be an outspoken, engaged student, and you should, as long as it's like staying within the boundaries of being appropriate. But if it is something that you think that like, for whatever reason, might play against you in your application at this time, you can always like, no, save that draft of that tweet and tweet it in about 9 months. Guys, that's all I have. Thank you so much for following along. Tweet fun thing. And now you can hopefully go and tweet something fun. I think we're over time, but we have some minutes, some time for questions.
So I have a question.
Yeah.
So what's your opinion on people completely blocking their social media accounts when they're in the process of going to med school or going to residency? Like, do you believe it's a good idea, or do you believe that maybe it's better to view your social media and edit it to eliminate maybe some edgy posts rather than making it completely inaccessible?
I think that like your personal social media accounts, like the stuff when you're like posting pictures. Sorry, I'm like a really shiny, like a really bright window, so I'm sweating. Like my personal account, like I mean, there is nothing wrong like with being a human and having a life. Like that's fine. However, I understand how like dicey the application season can be, and so like if you're considering, like I made my social media accounts private around the time of my application, like my personal ones, while keeping my professional. It's like the value of a professional platform is that then like that's like the first thing that it's like all the pictures that I have been putting up on Twitter are the first thing that pops up when somebody searches my name. And so it creates like, I'm trying to like game the Google algorithm, but also like no, private life is private. And so I usually like my personal Twitter account or social media accounts are still private because of that. Not because there's anything wrong on it, just because I don't feel like it's necessarily pertains to me getting a job as a resident or as a fellow. And so I did make it. I would recommend that if your social personal accounts, the ones where you're like talking to your family and posting your vacation pictures, it's probably savvy to just make those private. Just period. Any other questions? You good? Okay, so I'm gonna, yeah.
Like, if I, for example, like, how would you feel, like, let's say, I'll use myself an example. So I participated in a webinar, and there was an awesome physician working on a project, which I completely identified with, and I fell in love with it. Like, what's your opinion on maybe reaching out via social media to, I don't know, hopefully work or help out,
Totally. So if someone has a professional social media platform, I think like a public social media, especially Twitter, I think that is totally reasonable. I have gotten DMs from a lot of students, like on and off, about like a myriad different things, and that's totally welcome. That's just like my gut reaction. That like if you want to reach someone and you like, hey, I'm like interested, and you don't have like their email to like make that type of professional contact, that's totally fine, especially in the professional account. It is not okay to reach someone on their personal account for professional matters. So like, let's see, for whatever reason, this person has like a public or like an accessible Facebook profile, Facebook DMs for professional stuff. No. But I think that's the reason that I like Twitter, is because it does allow for that like two-way communication in a way that is like appropriate for a professional setting.